Hello everyone, I'm Bill. Welcome back to my channel. This video is going to be a continuation of War Magic videos. We're going to go over 4th level arcane spells today from the core rulebook and see which ones are already applicable as War Magic, which ones could be modified. If you could give these as one-use items, how devastating that would be in theory until used in an actual game. So without further ado, let's dive in. So 4th level sorcerer wizard spells. Dimensional Anchor bars extra dimensional movement. If you're seeing a lot of summoned creatures or a lot of say Dimension Door, teleport, stuff of that nature, Shadow Jump, you could use this to prevent them from moving around so much. As a strike force, that would be better. As an individual army, for an individual soldier to have, that would be expensive. So if it's a well-funded army, I could see that being very useful. Fire Trap opens object, deals 1d4 damage plus 1 per level. That'd be great for hiding your documents, your very sensitive documents, into something. Or in a location where you know your group knows not to go. You could trap a door or something that will trigger that whenever it's opened. Globe of Invulnerability Lesser, that would be very useful. Imagine a group of soldiers that have one-use items. If that globe is pretty big, so let's look at that up, then you could stop and protect a good amount of soldiers from the effects of 1st to 3rd level spells. Fireball being very devastating 3rd level spell. That could be very, very useful. 10-foot radius, so it's a 20-foot area. So say 1 out of every 4 of your soldiers, or 1 out of every 8 if you build them rows deep, could have this as a one-use item on their shield, on their person. If they do it, they can protect pretty much the front row, the middle row, the back row of soldiers from magic. So that could be very useful. Remove Curse. That's individual basis. That is okay. It's not great as a war spell. Stone Skin. Now, Stone Skin could be very devastating. If you give that as a one-use item to your frontline soldiers, all of a sudden they got damage reduction 10 to adamantine. They could sit there and fight for a long time without really taking much damage. Let's see how long Stone Skin lasts. Lasts 10 minutes per level. So 4th level, you need to be about 7th level, so 70 minutes, so an hour, over an hour for Stone Skin. That could be very much a game changer. You could even do that just as your strike force. You could do that as whatever you'd want individually and do it as a smaller cost and then upgrade it to your main force at some point. All depends on how your funds go, all depends on how high magic you're running. Black Tentacles. Tentacles grapple all creatures within a 20-foot spread. That can be useful. It would be a little bit more useful than Entangle, since it reaches out to grab things. But other than that, it wouldn't be that much better than Entangle. But as an arcane spell, that's the arcane version, I would say that'd be very useful. Dimension Door teleports you a short distance. That could be useful if you're moving a section of force. But the thing is, it's individual. Dimension Door is individual. So you're going to need, if you could give that to your strike force, all of a sudden they could be at a different angle against the enemy forces. Now it gives you a different type of advantage. Minor Creation creates 1 cloth or wooden object. That's not going to be great in combat unless you can think of something very creative to create with it. So by itself, I don't see it, but if I had to get very creative, because that's the only spells that were, say, in my spell book, I would probably come up with something. It's just right off the top of my head, I don't have anything for that one. Secure shelter, create sturdy cottage. That'd be useful if you were in a high threat area where there's lots of chances of other things coming upon your camp and such. But as far as military in a mass scale, that would be too expensive to be very effective. Solid fog blocks vision and slows movement. That'd be great to put up if you were to retreat. It would also be good to put up if you just needed to regroup to attack again, because the enemy's slowed down, so they're not going to be able to get to you quick enough to prevent you from, say, reforming your lines. Summon monster 4. This is when summon monster starts getting good. Now I can summon so many summon monster 3 monsters, which could all be elementals. I could summon a bigger elemental, medium size for this one, to do some battles for me. So this is where you can get very creative and very entertaining. The devastation from such can actually be beneficial to have summon monster. Arcane Eye, invisible floating eye, moves 30 feet per round. Great for scouting. Very good for scouting. That could be very useful for any number of spying missions and such. Detect scrying, alerts you to magical eavesdropping. Scrying with a crystal ball, which is my players do in my campaign because they're overly well funded. This would stop them from being able to do that. And it's not that high level of a spell, so that is very, very useful. Especially when you're controlling what's going on in a meeting and you definitely don't want the enemy knowing what your battle plans are. Locate creature indicates direction to a familiar creature. I don't see that being useful offhand. Now, if you knew of a threatening creature that you're familiar with in the area, that could be useful, especially if you want to lead an enemy force to it or it to them. But other than that, I don't see a good use for it. Right offhand, scrying, spies on subject from a distance, useful, especially to gather your information. Charm monster makes monster believe it is your ally. Very useful when dealing with powerful monsters, but not like overly powerful monsters like, say, ogres and such. Confusion. Subject behaves oddly for 1 round per level. Since it's an individual subject, it's not going to be that useful. If you could get that to target a mass group, then it becomes useful. Crushing Despair. Subject takes a -2 on attack rolls, damage rolls, saves, and checks. That, since it's an individual subject again, it's not going to be useful enough to apply as a military spell. Lesser Keys. Command subject for 7 hit dice or less. Individually, it might be okay, but like I said, battlefield, not going to help you. Fire Shield. Creatures attacking you take fire damage. You are protected from heat or cold. That can be useful. You get your strike force, your front row spearmen. Give them that. Now they're covered in fire, so all the enemies attacking them take fire damage. That can help you devastate their ranks quickly. Ice Storm. Hell deals 5d6 damage in cylinder, 40 feet across. Ice Storm could be very useful in taking out a good section. Put that on a couple of one-use items, and they could just chuck it into the middle of the enemy's forces before the shield walls clash. You could take out good chunks of the organization and their ability to create an effective shield wall. Besides, the damage would take out the low-level soldiers quickly. Resilient Sphere. The Force Globe protects but traps one subject. that'd be useful for protecting something, but it wouldn't be useful in a military aspect unless you had to, say, protect the prince because he's there and you need to get him out alive. But outside of that, I don't see it being useful on a military scale. Shout deafens all within cone and deals 5d6 sonic damage. That can be very useful. You give a whistle, a horn, the effect of the shout spell for one use, and they tell them to use against any spellcasting group they see. Get them into position. They could take out the wizards or the clerics by deafening them all, let alone the sonic damage that could probably kill the weaker ones quickly. Wall of Fire, that could be great in controlling the battlefield of where you want your enemies to go, where you want your allies at. Throw up the Wall of Fire, and they take fire damage. A lot of fire damage if they pass through it. It's 2d6 fire damage if they try to pass through it. If they're just close to it, within 10 feet, they take 2d4 fire damage. And if they're out 20 feet from it, they take 1d4 fire damage. So just the heat from being close to this firewall would control your enemies in a war setting. Wall of Ice, almost as effective as firewall, except it's more of a solid wall, so they'd have to either scale up it or go completely around it. Hallucinatory terrain makes one type of terrain appear like another. That could be very useful if you had time to prep the land. You could then cast hallucinatory terrain over the land after you've put in a bunch of pit traps and ankle twisters, punji sticks, stuff of that nature. Let's look up hallucinatory terrain. Last 2 hours per level. So what I say, 7th level to cast this, so 14 hours. So you prepare the land, and then pretty much the evening before battle, you could cast that, and the land will look the same as the battle begins, and then they could step in all the holes with the punji sticks and such and really hurt themselves. Illusionary wall, floor, or ceiling looks real, but anything can pass through it. Really good for setting up your ambushes, or if you're setting up your fort for a takeover or a siege, you could cast that on the arrow slit windows and make it look like a solid wall. The people on the inside could see through it, and people on the outside cannot. So you're sitting there, you're watching them, and then all of a sudden arrows come out of the walls without there being any evidence that it would. That can demoralize your enemy as well as control them in a good way. Invisibility Greater. That'd be great on your strike force or on anything you wanted to deal massive amounts of damage and not be seen. Put that on the ogre that you have in your military and have it just run into the enemies and waylay them as it will. It'd take a good bit before they realize what's going on and how to counter it. Phantasmal Killer. Fearsome illusion kills subject or deals 3d6 damage. Now, that can be useful against one subject, but in a military setting, not that great. Rainbow Pattern. Lights fascinate 24 hit dice of creatures. If they're all really weak military soldiers, level 1s to 3, you've just taken out, if they're all level 1s, you just took out 24 of them that can't do anything for the fascination. Not going to say it lasts the whole battle, but that can give you a couple turns to get the advantage. Shadow Conjuration mimics a conjuration spell below 4th level. Pretty useful. Animate Dead. If you're doing an undead army, Animate Dead's always useful. Bestow Curse is a single target. So it's not going to be that great for a military use. Now, if you could get that to target a mass group, then that would be very useful. Contagion. Contagion would be good if you had a week or two, or if you were laying siege to someone somewhere. You could infect someone with a contagion and have them go in and spread that everywhere. Innervation, subject gains 1d4 negative levels. That would be, since it's subject, that'd be very one target type deal. Fear, subjects within cone flee for 1 round per level. Now that could be useful if you can angle the cone to get the maximum amount of soldiers to flee. Or if you put that on the fear, since it's a cone, if you put that on a whistle, a horn, or something, and then you blow it, since it's a cone, you blow it in the direction you want and have it do that as a one-use item. That could be very useful. B-shape. B-shape would not be that effective unless, I don't know, is elephants large or huge? I think they're huge, because I would see that being very effective if you were a rhino or an elephant. But that'd be a single one. So the only way to get around that is it'd be expensive, but give one-use items to your soldiers and have them use B-shape to turn into large animals that can then devastate the ranks in front of them. Elemental body turns you into a small elemental. That could be useful too, just in the same way as B-shape. You might be small, but if you're a small earth elemental, you can meld with stone. You can grab somebody's ankle, you can pull them into the ground, you can leave them trapped. So it could be useful. Enlarge person mass. So at this level, you'd only get 7 creatures, because it's 1 creature per level, doubles in size. So for every 7 soldiers, give them an enlarged person mass, and you pretty much have your whole military the size of ogres if they were humans. And now they're dealing out even more damage than normal. So that could be very, very useful. Pneumatic enhancer is only useful for wizards. It's kind of as far as having that outside of a war setting, it'd be great. It's just, as a war spell, it's Mass reduce person. Now that could be useful too. It would still be limited to 7 subjects, but you get a couple of area effects to go off. Say I put these in beads that trigger when they hit a solid surface and hand them to some slingers. And then they're just supposed to target that group there, that group there, that group there. All of a sudden, they're now half their size. Their equipment shrinks with them, so they're not disadvantaged as far as being unequipped, but their weapon damage type goes down a die. Their effectiveness goes down because their strength reduces, so on and so forth. So that could be very, very useful. Stone shape. Stone shape is very useful for controlling an area where you have limited access, like corridors and stuff. So if you're being besieged or you're trying to lay up in an area, it could be very useful. Outside of that, I don't see it being as useful on a military scale. Remember, this is all just like war scale. Outside of that, outside of a military scale, it's very useful. I've used it in a lot of battles and won a lot of fights with stone shape. The best being that I trapped a golem in the ground with it, and we either could have left it alone or just beat on it until it died. So we did the latter. And that is the last of the 4th level arcane spells in this book. So there we are on 4th level arcane spells used as war spells. If you have any creative ideas for any of the spells that I read, or you've seen spells used in a very battlefield controlling way for, say, two forces that would be 50 to 150 to 250 strong. Put them in the comments below. Tell me how it played out, what was useful, what wasn't useful. And let's get more creative in our battlefield spells and magic they have access to, especially under the rules that don't cover how a lot of this could be used in very creative and warlike fashion. Well, until we meet again.